Hi folks, this is Dr. Rob Cywes. I am the Carb Addiction Doc. And today I'm going to go a little deep into kind of some of the backstory of our practice. A lot of people, I'm a carb addict, I'm addicted to food, which nobody can be. You cannot be addicted to food. Food won't make you fat. But nevertheless, people more and more are starting to understand or identify with the concept of carbohydrate addiction rather than just overeating. And the addiction is where you're using sugar and starch, snacking and overeating as a way to manage emotional needs rather than nutritional needs. And if you use an addiction approach, the issue with most diets is they're unsustainable. Everybody does great for a little while, but 98% of them fail because of the sustainability, not because of the effectiveness. So even a ketogenic or a carnivore diet will fail typically if you just treat it as a diet. And so one of the common things that we try to juxtapose is the concept of what are the principles of addiction management? What changes do you need to make when it comes to addiction, and who is an addict versus someone who just needs to lose a little bit of weight and wants to go on some calorie reductive diet, whether it's a keto diet or not, still calorie reductive. So as we break down addiction, one of the key things about addiction, and I'm going to go into a little bit of a psychological theoretical explanation here, is that when we migrate toward relying predominantly, if not exclusively, on instant gratification mechanisms to rapidly and powerfully activate for short duration the endorphin system, to dissipate, to numb, soothe, and obliterate our emotional tension. Have a cigarette, have a shot of whiskey, eat some ice cream. That carbohydrate, that little snack, very powerfully dissipates emotional tension. But on the back end, there's subconscious negativity, guilt, remorse, because every fat person knows it's not a good idea to eat some ice cream. So we have to distort the reality of the harm to condone the consumption. So the problem with addiction, apart from the harm that the drug itself does, is that it is extremely erosive to an already profoundly eroded sense of self. So our self-esteem, our self-confidence, our self-respect, not what we show the world necessarily, not our facade, but who we believe ourselves to be. That sense of self, our self-worth, is in the toilet. And when our self-worth is in the toilet, for a variety of reasons, either we were raised in an environment that eroded our sense of self, or we've never built up a sense of self. We may be happy-go-lucky. We don't have a sense of self because a sense of self is the response. It grows on the back end of an effort-based emotion management system. I'll discuss that in a few minutes. But when our sense of self is poor, and you've got to have an honest conversation with yourself about that, when there's a degree of insecurity, when you don't have that self-esteem, that self-confidence, and that self-respect, we then automatically have to externalize our locus of validation, because when our sense of self is poor, we are unable, incapable of self-validating. I'm proud of you. I'm proud of you, my son, my boy. That's how I talk to myself. It's self-speak. But when we generate things from within that we're proud of, that's an internal locus of validation. But most often, people with a vulnerability to addictive behavior, the first thing that's in the toilet is that sense of self, and we can't self-validate. So therefore we externalize it. And one of the things the drugs do, or behaviors, they are external forms of validation. So when I eat that ice cream makes me feel good. I didn't generate that good feeling from within. I used an external substance to make me feel good, but on the back end, it's erosive to my sense of self. So completely is a negative cycle. Same thing when we are raised in an authoritarian family, or in a family that is permissive and everyone's happy-go-lucky. There's seldom unconditional praise in those families. Look, mommy, I got an A in my math test. I came second in the class. Well, that's good, but what questions did you get wrong, and who came first? Oh, hey, that was a great goal you scored, but you know what? You should have run around the goalie at the end, and you should have gone for the left upper post. That's actually the right one, rather than the left one. we're always wanting our children to do better. We're always giving people advice unsolicited. And if you are that person, you see that as criticism. I'm not good enough. The reason why this person's giving me advice about my math test or my soccer playing, they believe it's going to improve me. All I see is criticism that I'm not good enough. And I can't validate to myself unconditionally that I'm good if I don't see that. And if that person that we most love, that we most trust, our mother, our father, whoever that person is always yabbutting or giving us advice, we don't receive unconditional praise from them. We desperately want unconditional approval from the people we most love. But if they're not capable of doing that, we don't think, they can't approve of me. We think, I'm a terrible person. I don't deserve the approval. Think that through. So what we then do is we externalize our locus of validation. We do so much for people around us, hoping that they will approve of us because we can't approve of ourselves. And that's addiction. And then we use substances, we use behaviors that are external locuses of validation that make us feel good because we can't feel good from within. And a large part of the deepest part of sustainable addiction management is to return your locus of validation internally. And the only way you can do that, the only way, you cannot outsource this, the only way in which you can return your locus of validation internally is by you putting an effort into anything that you do that you value. And that could be physical activity. If you go for a walk, it's never about how long or how far or how fast you walk, because that's an outcome parameter and it's never good enough. But if you are proud of the effort, proud of the fact that you went for that walk or that swim or did something physically active, unconditional pride returns that locus of validation to yourself, because the only person that can be proud of you doing that is you for yourself. And in tiny increments, that pride in self, that unconditional pride in effort, builds up self-esteem, self-confidence, and self-respect. And you return that locus of validation to self. It doesn't matter what they think. Nice if they approve unconditionally, it doesn't matter. Because what matters is I'm approving. And whether that is physical activity or something creative. Hey, I played my guitar. Yeah, the cat next door had a seizure because I'm terrible. It doesn't matter. I'm playing my guitar and I'm proud of the fact I did. I'm having a little spiritual moment. I'm having a meditative moment. I'm able to be vulnerable in front of people I trust. Those are moments of unconditional pride, but you've got to detach outcome parameters from that moment of pride. And as you build up your self-esteem, your self-confidence, your self-respect, your self-worth, I am worthy. Now you are a judge of the most important parameters of who you are as a human being, which is what you do, what you choose to do, and what you execute on. And one of the biggest failures, one of the biggest externalizations of validation is a device that every fat person is obsessed with. And that is the scale. The scale is an external locus of validation because you cannot make the scale move. You can eat right, but it doesn't mean the scale moves. You eat a tub of ice cream, the scale goes down by 2 pounds. Ha ha ha, look, the ice cream's fine. You go on a extended fast for 3 days and you gain 1 pound. I'm a terrible person. Look at this. I'm useless. The scale is a liar to you because it's an external form of validation that you do not need in your life. It's a monitoring device for sure. But every fat person lives and dies by the scale because they're incapable of self-validation. If you know you ate right, if you know you did what you set out to do, that should be enough. And every now and then the scale will validate that. But every day the scale will beat you down. Because external validation, I'm not going to use that word. It was the 4-letter word for fornication. I'm not going to use that. External validation messes with you. Internal validation is unconditional. So one of the things that you'll find if you're patient in my practice, and it's I'll explain to you how this works, so listen fully. One of the first things I say, hey, how you doing? What have you done since the last time we talked? Open-ended question. What have you done? What's been happening since the last time we talked? And I get three responses. Three responses that define for me where you are in a transition of dealing with your addiction. Because by definition, if you're obese, if you've got insulin resistance, you have an addiction to carbohydrates. So we know that you're the addict, whether you believe it or not, either way. But what have you done? And I get three responses. The first is, oh my God, I had COVID and my sister died and we went on a vacation. When you start vomiting out all of the shit in your lives, I know that that is just an extremely sophisticated way of telling me that you went back to carbohydrates, you went back to crystal meth and snacking and overeating. You went back to the fridge and the pantry as your external source of emotional reprieve. But what we have to do as addicts is we've got this tremendously powerful, sophisticated way of validating and justifying and trivializing and rationalizing and minimizing to ourselves that it's okay to do that for this valid reason. And the reason why addiction is binary, and addiction is about permission, not about how much you eat as opposed to diets, which are you can have a little bit, but you can't have a lot. The reason for that is because there's never, ever, ever, ever a valid reason for an alcoholic to have a drink. And there's never, ever, ever a valid reason for a fat person or a diabetic to consume a carbohydrate unless they've overdosed on insulin. Other than that, excuse me, there's never, see, that little quirky thing made me feel good. I took a sneeze and I threw it over my shoulder. Stupid, silly little thing, but you know what? That's part of self-validation. Quirky, yes. Made me feel good. Segue. The point I'm making is that if your response to me is about all the stresses in your life, that's called life, L-I-F-E. And addiction is about changing how you manage life, not using life as a pretext to justify going backwards. All of us go backwards. But until we recognize it was a mistake, until we have ownership that it was a mistake and correct that, we're trapped in validating our mistakes based on what's happening to us. And the goal here is to develop better strategies, internal strategies, effort-based strategies to deal with emotional tension, to replace the consumption of drugs and a drug-related pattern for emotional reserve. So when somebody comes in and they tell me about all the stuff going on in their life without saying anything else, I've got to start at the beginning again. And I've got to help them to, again, remove those carbohydrates, change those patterns. I've got to start at square one. And you know what? That's perfectly fine. Nobody does this perfectly right away. Everybody is terrible to begin with, but we grow. So if you're making those excuses to yourselves, if you're using your life to justify what you're eating and drinking, ask yourself, what can I do about it? How do I address this? I see anxiety coming at me. I'm going to go for a walk. Not, it's okay for me to have that ice cream because I was exhausted and until he died. That's the first response. Second response I get, where people are super proud. Oh, I heard what you said. I heard what SHERYL, the dietitian, said. SHERYL's phenomenal, by the way. I've changed my eating. I'm eating twice a day. I'm only eating BBBE, thanks Ken Berry. I've stuck to my diet. I love that. But here's the problem. That is still a dietary approach to addiction. Yes, it's a rite of passage. Yes, early on, we really want to focus on what we're eating. And often those same people tell me, well, I haven't had bread since the last time. I haven't had, or you know what, I went out to a restaurant and I just had one potato and I gave the other potatoes away. And they're proud of that. And I like that, except they're still trapped in diet mode. They're still I've got to be cautious. I don't want to question, well, you still ate that darn potato. It's about permission. Because an alcoholic who has a sip of beer is drinking. They crossed that threshold. They distorted the reality of the harm to cross the threshold. So addiction management is, I'm not eating carbohydrates. I'm not snacking. I got my bridge drink. But if you are still trapped in diet mode, better than being trapped in validation mode, but now I've got to help you into addiction mode. So I like to talk about what you're eating and drinking, but it always comes out, well, I just had this thing, or I had a cheat day. No, it's called a relapse. Cheat day in diet world, but in my world, that's a relapse. It's a relapse. Alcoholic has a cheat day. Heroin addict, Tuesday morning, I just had a little bit of heroin. Just a little cheat. No, it wasn't a cheat day. It was a relapse. It may sound harsh, but that's the reality of addiction management, calling yourself out on that. Third answer I get. Well, since the last time I saw you, we went on vacation. It was so cool. We went up the Volga River on a Viking boat. These are all real stories. I'm starting to play the guitar again. I joined a band. I've started writing. I did my first 5K. I reconnected with my father who I was alienated from, and I took the risk of going to visit him, and we had a cool visit because he's still the same guy, but I could listen to him now, and I know where he's coming from. That's growth. So when your world is all about self-care that is self-initiated, shit's still happening, life is still happening to you. But I'm going to human connection. I'm going to spirituality. I'm going to physical activity. I'm going to the creative arts for my resolution, for my self-care. And I am proud of that. And my self-esteem, my self-confidence, my self-respect is growing every day. I'm humble. Listen to that song, Humble and Kind, one of the most beautiful songs. It's a country song. I think it's Kenny Chesney, but it's just such a beautiful song. Pride inside, humble and kind. A poem to a child. Google that. Google humble and kind. Listen to the words. That's all we're looking for. Internal locus of validation. And as your sense of self-worth, as your sense of self grows, the scale doesn't matter. Yeah, it's nice to see it go down, but I don't live and die by that. I don't live and die by external validation. I don't need you to tell me I'm a good person. I'm a good person, therefore I'm good with you. Interesting. Because it's not about what you do to me. It's understanding empathetically, okay, they're having their difficulties. I still like them or I don't like them. If I don't like them, I'll stay away from them. But I can do it silently. I don't have to tell anybody. Because it doesn't matter what I think outside. It matters what I think in here. Self-validation, folks. Self-speak, self-validation is the deepest part of addiction management. And it's that transfer. But you got to put the effort in. And return your locus of validation from everything out there that makes you feel good, or that you do things for to make you feel good, and do things to make yourself feel good. I hope this resonates because this is our lifetime objective. There's no endpoint to it. We're always a student. We're never an expert. We're always getting better. There's always another thing to try, another thing to get excited about, another thing to dream about. And if you're moving forward down that pathway of self-care, very, very little is going to knock you sideways or backwards. I hope I've made you think. I hope I've made you ask yourself, what did I do today for me? Because if you're so busy taking care of everybody else, you're trapped in addiction. You're trapped in an external locus of validation. If you carve time out for yourself and you do self-care first, you are a more effective, happier, healthier human being. And that's what we're striving for. I am the Carb Addiction Doc. If you want to be part of this, set up a consult. I'm ridiculously overwhelmed and busy, so it may take a little bit of time. So you decide. Be patient. But text us or WhatsApp us. 561-517-0642. But please also subscribe to this channel. There's a lot of content from a variety of different places, and spread the word. Obesity is a substance abuse problem. Type 2 diabetes is a substance abuse problem. It's an emotion management problem. It is not a calorie problem. Till next time.